Hello, good evening. Thank you all for attending to this session regarding the basic for development of a smart solution. We are going to focus on the IAM components, the access and identity management components within the FIWARE infrastructure. And well, first of all, I will give the floor to my colleague Joaquín, who is going to start his presentation regarding KeyRock component.
Thank you, Francisco. We are going to introduce a bit of everything that you will have later. I will try to present you all these kind of things. So I will share the presentation. I'll share my screen. Wait a moment. I hope. Okay. Okay, so our first lecture today will be to give you idea about all the framework of everything that we are related here. As you may know, identity management and access control is key for all the systems that we want to deploy, use, or whatever we want to use. This means that we really need some kind of solution that offers a very flexible way and is fully integrated with all the other tools. This means that you don't have to develop anything. You just have all the components already ready to be used, and you perhaps have to tailor a bit if you want to do something different from the usual things. But everything is ready for you to connect to different and federated different identity management systems, and all with work with the rest of different things that we want to access and have different ways of handling all these things. So, as you may know, FIWARE is a set of different components that are all open source and allows you to interconnect different things to have different kind of smart solutions. Of course, these smart solutions means that you will want to have everything secure, and you want to have all the security that you need for your special solution to be built upon this. This means that you have several components that are called generic enablers inside FIWARE that will do different things. Can do data injection, can select information from different IoT devices, send all this information to the context broker, and the context broker will send them to different processing, visualization, and other things that we want to do with this kind of data. All of this is outside this presentation, and we will focus on what is the security framework, and when you can interconnect all these components, and you want to use them to build your own solution. This means that you want to join all these components in a secure way. We already have different architectures and different solutions for this. All are tailored for different needs that we have identified. And in case your use case is very, very complex and does not match these things, we cannot tailor them to the different needs. But it's sure in 99% that what we are going to present here will match whatever need you have for these kind of things. So we have a lot of components. They want to interact with other components. And this means that all these communications have to be secure, and we have to know who is doing things and what things you are able to do and what you are not able to do. In the most complex scenario, not all these pieces will be handled by the same player. Everything is simpler if the same player have all the pieces. This means that this is under your organization, under your security, and wherever. But this is not the common case. The common case is that different organizations have different components, and this means that they have to trust each other. And you have to trust knowing who is going to do these things, who this means identity, and what you are allowed to do inside these organizations is whatever is called the access control part that we will present in a bit in this kind of solution. The component is called KeyRock, and will be the identity manager and the access control, and will allow you to define any kind of policies. Most of the policies you need will be very simple, and it have different tools that help you to define the policies that you require for this connection and these solutions. Once you are identified, you have access control over all the components. This means that each of the components could be in a different organization and could have different access rules for this. Even we identify here that everything is under the same control, we can have different rules for all the different components that we want to have. If we want to have video with Curento, analysis with Cosmos, the context broker, what cloud to present them, CCAN and other solutions, everything could be tailored to the needs and the things that you need to have in all these kind of components. We have different pieces that together help you to set up these kind of things. First, KeyRock is the identity manager. This is let's say, the main player in these things. There, we provide solutions or to connect to your own identity manager using the standard protocols that are defined for this. Or you can use it as an identity manager for your deployment and for different things. In order to enforce these kind of things, we can use several components. Here we will present Wilma, but later they show you how to use this using Kong. All of this require that you define policies in different languages. Here we will use the standard for the industry, that is the XHTML languages. Probably if you don't want, you don't have to use the language. We have different things that allow you to define the policies, the more usual ones, without the need to know this language. The language in the simple cases, well, it's understandable, but the language can be quite complex. And this means that you can define any kind of policy with this. You have this power, but you don't need to use it in most cases. So the most simple XML files will be automatically produced for the needs that you have in most of the cases that you have here, and you are allowed to know these things. So the identity manager, as I mentioned, is KeyRock, is open source, has been developed by the Universidad Politécnica de Madrid, and have different evolutions and different instances around the different in the past, but now it's very solid and it's very well tested, and you can use it for several things. Of course, if you want to access the code, here is the repository at GitHub. In case you want to know anything or want to contribute or whatever you need to do with it. It is developed using Node.js technology that we think that is very powerful for this kind of things, and is very adequate for this kind of tools that we want to use and have it here. So we have different features inside the KeyRock. This is, of course, an evolving project, and this means that in case you need something different, we can add it later. So the main interface is web interface. Even you have REST APIs where you can do the same that in the web interface. This means that you can automatize with different scripting language, the one you choose, as is the REST API. You can use the solution you prefer to do a script, or in case you want to do it manually, you have a web interface for handling all these kind of things. We will have the different and the usual way of defining things. This means you can define users, and we have a model where you can define groups and the different devices that belongs to these groups. This is a way of organizing the users, and we thought that is the right one for this kind of things. As the start is a web application, we have the let's say state of the art for this kind of things, that is OAuth 2 and OpenID Connect. This allows you single sign-on and interoperability with the usual web technology. This is right now being used in most of the web applications. If you go to Google, Facebook, Twitter, or whatever, they are using this kind of authorization, and we have managed to tailor this in order that you are allowed to access the devices and the IoT devices and all these kind of things. So in order to simplify this, we have a concept that is an application where you can put the different roles. Of course, it's a role-based approach, and this means that we define different roles and you allow to have different permission management for this. The different components uses the usual architecture for this kind of things, usually with a PAP and PDP, that are the points for defining and enforcing the different policies. You can use others if they are following the usual standards for this, but everything comes together quite used for all these kinds of things. Okay. This means also that we will have different kind of solutions for all these things, and all will be remotely used in a very simple way. Also, we support the different solution that is being used in the web. That means JSON Web Tokens. The JSON Web Tokens is the standard. I think it's a joint standard from the ATF and WTC that allows you to encapsulate all the information. You will have different tokens that will be generated here for identity and access, and you can put them in a JSON format in a way that they are doing these kind of things. And this means that all kind of permanent tokens that are the normal for web applications will be developing these kind of things. Of course, we have the usual way of having two-factor authentication. This means that when you enter, you will be called for a single-use code that allows you to enter. Usually send you via email, or you can add, if you want to, an SMS gateway in order to do this kind of interconnections. And you can connect with different databases like MySQL, Postgres, and I think that also other protocols for having databases with all the users defined in a simple way, or in a way that is done in your organization. If you want also to interconnect with the ADAS, that is the European authentication compatibility, well, it's also plugged and tested, and you can use this for your authentication. In this case, you delegate the authentication to the one that you have in your country, or in Europe, as it's a federated, the one that is provided by your own country, and allows you to different kinds of scenarios with this. We are using right now ADAS 1, as ADAS 2 is still not fully approved. It's in testing, and we will have also support later for ADAS 2 support. ADAS 2 support is slightly different because it's a self-sovereign identity approach, and this means that we will have different approaches on this. Well, the web proxy, that is the one that it takes care on also how you enter on these kind of things. You will have fully support for the basic. The basic are the ones that I mentioned that you don't need to make the files for these kind of things, but you can have the more complex policies and you have support for all of this. It's interconnected with all others connections. You have all two access tokens. As I mentioned, these tokens are compatible right now with the JSON with tokens. That is the other solution for defining and sending in tokens. So it's completely standard with this and allows you to have a lot of PDP configuration with all these kind of things. And the data will be presented to you. You can integrate everything with different API management tools, like it is AppInf or API Umbrella, and the one that will be presented that is based with Kong. That it means that the access control allows you to have different instances of REST APIs and will be fully managed by you in the way that you decide that you want to interconnect to all the different things that are there. As I mentioned, we have in the back a server that fully supports XAML. It is with the 3 version, the 3.0 version. That means that will be a fully standard compiler for this kind of things. All the other, the one that I have presented before, we rely on these components. Even they have different solutions for access control based on roles and a back fully RESTful control with this. Is also prepared for a multi-tenant scenario. This means that you will have an instance that can be accessed by several components or several roles in this, and everything is supported for this. And in this, we are, as I mentioned, fully supporting the OASIS specification, the XML 3.0, plus the different profiles that are required for this, and from ISO, the fast InfoSet industry. This means that we have all this power, and as I mentioned, probably you don't need all this power. This power is there, you can use it, you can define if you want to use the full XML languages, but for most cases that are the simple ones, you don't need this. This means that you want the usual cases are already provided there, and we have different things that you have to do on this. Even if you need more functionality, as everything is open source, you can ask us or try to define different functional solutions that are not there. This won't be the case, but everything is open and you can tailor to whatever thing that you will need on this. So how is it usually working? Well, auth2 flow is, well, probably you know it, but I will try to explain in case you are not aware of this. You are trying to interact with any application, usually using a web interface, but it could be other kinds of interfaces. So we try to access the service applications, and this means that it identified that you didn't know you or know the device or know the thing you are trying to connect. So the server will try to know if you are someone that are allowed to enter, and in case that you are allowed to enter, what you are allowed to do with this. This means that it will build an auth2 request. You don't see it. It will be sent to the identity and management for the different infrastructure, and the IDM will be sent there. Will be checked here if you are identified. Will follow the usual way with user and password, and as I mentioned, we have the two-way token that is by another way in extra one use password will be sent to you. If everything is okay, this means that you are there and your authentication is right, then means it will give you the access token. The access token will be used later with the service application to access different things and all these kind of things. Once you are there, it will request the information, especially about your roles and the things that you can there, will be asked by the service, and the IDM will return you these kind of things. Well, this is the general. If we focus more and we go a bit for the different pieces, we will try to identify this in more detail. This means that once we have is the same that in the previous one, just that we are knowing more what is inside the boxes. So we have the service application. We follow the outflow. This means that it's not just one interaction, but it's a flow of different interactions that are as it is defined in the protocol, in the standard, and we will interact with the ADM. We'll also interact with the server that have all the policies. These policies will be checked and will be returned first if you can enter, and later will be defined what you can do. And later, when you try with this token to access the PAP, that is Vilma, that is protecting some services. Why are you using a component that is not inside the service? Because we don't want you to code this inside the services. This means that you can build and also design the service without the authentication and the iteration in this, because the PAP will filter the ones that are not fully authenticated. So once you enter, and once you are calling the services, these services didn't have the identity code in itself, but it's in a separate component, in a separate process, that is the PAP. The PAP will check again if this token is the right one and the identity is good, and also will check what can do. This means if we are talking about REST applications, that you can, for example, put limits on the verbs that you have here. The verbs are the usual thing that are in the REST calls. That means you can get write, delete, or put different information there. If, for example, your role is that you can only read, you can do get, but you cannot put or post things, or you cannot delete the things that are there, the different things that are in the service. As I mentioned, the service is protected, does not need to be aware of these things, as the PEP will do all these kind of things for you. And once is sure that the semantic of the thing that you are doing is inside the policy that you have already defined, only in this case will allow you to call the service. So the service is fully secure, but does not need to implement anything around security, because everything will be in another process that will be separated from you. So when we are doing these kind of things, we can have the more basic thing. This is authentication. Authentication means that the system know you have the right way to prove that you are yourself. As I mentioned, usually is user and password, with different approaches with the password and these kind of things. You can use or connect other ways of authentication. If you have different devices or other approaches, you can use it then. But well, everything is for the most use cases. This is the one that is used with user and password. And later you can have the basic authorization. The basic authorization means that it's the most usual cases where some people, for example, can read information, and other people have different role and can write information. And the advanced authorization is that you want to tailor and you want to have your use case that not match the one that is the basic one, and you need to tailor for your needs that you will have more things to do and more things to define there. So the basic level, that is authentication, just will check if the user has been authenticated in the ways that you have designed or that your organization have for identifying users, or perhaps you want to have other kind of users that are defined inside a keylog and are not the one that you need to have there. We will see how this is done. This is the most simple way. The user want to enter. Here we have the out to flow. That means that you have you may have some redirection, and you can enter again the identification, the user and password. And once the OAuth design that your identity and the way that you have decided to do these things, you will be identified inside the EDM. Here, we still don't need to check anything about the policies because we are doing just authentication. With authorization, then the policies will enter and you can use it later. Well, if you are identified, a token will be sent to you. You will use this token several times. I mean, usual, you just do the authentication one time, and usually is defined a timeout. That this means that you will have to identify next. Again, usually I think that is 24 hours or something like that. You can tailor this, you can change this, but this means that you have already a token for, well, the period of time that you have decided that is the right one for your solution and the system you are building. And this means that in these cases, you just will send the token. In this case, you just try to access the service backend, and you have to introduce the token in all the calls that you are doing to the backend. As I mentioned, the PEP will receive these kind of things, and will do the checking for the token. If the token is still valid and is the right one, then allows you to enter the backend with things that we will see later in the different ways of these things. One comment, as you know, they will be or in different machines or processed in the same machine. And usually the trick is that these are set in different ports for listening, the communication and ports for the TCP protocol. Usually this is based on HTTP. This means that HTTP goes over TCP. TCP needs the IP direction and a port. So the PEP will be listening in one port, and in case everything is okay, redirect the call to the service backend that is usually listening in another port. Well, if once that we have been authenticated, we can go a bit further. And this means that now you have to check if you can access a resource. As I mentioned, in most of the cases, this means REST. And in REST, you have defined in your application probably different HTTP verbs that are the actions that are inside the HTTP protocol, and a resource path that usually identified the object or the device or whatever that you want to access. This means that here or right now we'll enter a bit of the uses of the different policies. In this case, it's quite similar to the case before. Most of the cases that you are using just the basic one, you don't need really to evaluate the policies because are very simple. So they are short circuit for this. And in this case, it's the same. We identify, and in this case, we do the different token authentication and authorization here. It will check if you have the right the user. As I mentioned, is role-based solutions. This means that each of the user will define or will be inside a category of different roles, and on all of these roles can be different actions and different HTTP verbs. So once you are allowed to enter, probably you are assigned to a role. The most common role are the people that are only allowed to look. This means only can perform gets, and users that are allowed to change, that are usually via put or post things. And once that is clear which is your role, it will allow you or not to enter or not again, checking via PEP that we are able of do all these kinds of things. As I mentioned, this is probably your case. You don't need everything more complex, but in case you need something more complex, you are allowed to use any XML policies that you can define. I won't lie to you, XML, unless you are or have some experience on this, is not a very easy language. Probably you can cut and paste some of the most common cases. The language have a lot of things that are defined there that are very powerful, but means that usually you need to know this language. If you really want to do something really nice and you are expert on XML, you can define and do whatever you want with these kind of things. In these cases, we are executing the policy inside the PAP and will be enforced by the PDP. It's quite similar to the case before. We enter, we perform the authentication, and in this case, later, when we will try to access the service, they will be checked if you have the authorization to do this. In this case, it's not as simple as assign you the verbs, but the XAML file that you have defined as policy for the roles that we have here will be executed by the P. This will be also later checked by the PDP, will be executing these definitions that are there, and this means that you can define, as I mentioned, really complex policy if you need them. This will all, in this case, will decide if you are able to perform different actions and will return whatever you need to do these kinds of things for doing these different things inside there. Well, you need to interchange different information. There are different ways of doing these things. Some of this information can go usual as a very strange string that is there. This means that you need to have some serialization for this kind of things. The token, as I mentioned before, follow the JSON Web Token standard that is defined by the ATF and is inside an RFC, that is a request for comments. That is the way that the information is doing information interchange in internet. All the internet follows different kind of things, and there we have the JSON Web Token. The JSON Web Token have this kind of look inside, usually can be serialized in a binary way, but well, you can look inside this and well, you define the algorithm, the type that is JSON Web Token, and there you have different things. That is the ID assigned to you, the name for the user, some information like the email or whatever you need. The key here is that you have also the different roles, and you have the organization you are belonging to, and there you can know what is your role inside this organization. Everything is secure and have different. Let me see, well, it's not. You can see it, but it's there. There you have all the base 64 encoding for this. That is these kind of things. And here you have the secret, the payload, and all the things related to the cryptographic that are defined for these kind of things. Everything is secure. This is a very well-known environment that is used by all the applications right now over internet, and this means that have been really tested and is quite secure for all the cases that you want to use over this kind of things. So in the case of the JSON Web Tokens, the outflow is a bit different. That is different from the token originally defined in the OAuth 2 specification. This is for historical reasons. The OAuth 2 specification came first. Was developed by some organization. I don't remember now the name, but was developed by different organizations. And when they go to the ATF, they define the JSON Web Token in a way that it interoperates because all the security that is inside the the applications of internet defined in the ATF. And this means that they have to adapt to the OAuth 2. So the tokens that are sent in the OAuth 2, now instead of being the one defined initially, are the one defined by the JSON web tokens that we have there. So you will call using this kind of information, and here the request, instead of having just the plain token as it is defined in the OAuth 2 specification, it includes the JSON web token that you have there. This will be used again by the PEP, and you will do the same thing. You get the token will check for authorization. As I mentioned, the authentications have been done before. Or if you have not performed the authentication, you don't have the token. So once you have the token, you can send it here, and the token will check for authentication, and you will have these kind of things. You will have associated with different profile, different case of different things that you can use and have in your profile. You have a list of attributes that will be configurable in your configuration file. We have defined some of them, but you can define others. Keyrock will handle the one you define. Usually, this is in the way of having an attribute name and attribute value. This is easy to handle, and you can have then usually a bin of type of a string. Later you can define numbers, and you can do all these kind of things. All these attributes will be included in the user profile. This means that the ones that we have defined and the ones that you want to define and have to. As I mentioned, we have already put inside the usual attributes that we think are the right ones, but you can extend it without any problem using the configuration files. And there you can have all the information that you think that is valuable for your application, and you need to check it, or later for checking in the policies that you need. Once you validate the token, this information is returned to you, and you can use this for doing personalization and different kind of services. For example, we have already used this in order to have some usability. We have defined and used this kind of token in some research that we have already done in order to adapt them for different needs. If the user have defined that have some accessibility problems, that is problems from hearing or from coloring, for example, if you are colorblind, well, the service can use these things to adapt in a very simple way to do all these kinds of things. So once you perform the identification and you have the access consent and you get the user attributes, you can have these attributes inside your service for define whatever you need. As I mentioned, you can extend it, and if your service needs something special, there is no problem in adding these kind of things and accessing in a different way the handles and the things that you have there. As I probably in some cases you want to use Keyrock just as the identity manager. You have a deployment, and the deployment, let's say, is self-contained. So means that Keyrock have all the information that you need. It have a database that have inside that have all kind of users, information, roles, etc. But if this information you need to somehow be linked to the identity manager that you have in your organization, this means that you don't want to put all the users in your organization inside the Keyrock because you want to have access to all the people that you have in your organization. We have different connectors for this. For example, we have a very usual one that is the LDAP server. LDAP is a protocol that was defined also by the ATF. I think it was in the 80s, I don't know, even in the 70s, but it's a very old protocol. I have the advantages that is available for most of this. We have other ways of connecting, but the LDAP is the most simple one that allows you to have on access information from the user directory that you have in your organization, things like the username, the password, or the email. This means that This information could be somehow federated or get taken from the one you have in your organization. Also, have a connector for different SQL databases. That means that you can have extra databases where this information is provided. If you don't want to interconnect it to the real one in your organization, you can make a backup and put here a database with all this kind of information for this. All of this is in the documentation, and here you can see how you can interconnect and have access for different ways of handling authentication via, as I mentioned, LDAP, that is the remote directory protocol that is defined for all the services all over internet, and is the most important one on this. Well, but if you want to interconnect to something that is like an API gateway, you can interconnect via other means. This means that you can use different API management systems. In the most simple cases, you go directly to the service, but you want to protect the service with an API gateway. This means that you can define extra things that can be, for example, the rate limit. You don't want to, or the user can try to do a denial of service doing a lot of requests and overriding your system. Well, all these things we take it away and put it inside the different things. As I mentioned, we support several of these kind of IP gateways, but in our case, this will be Kong. Later, you will have more presentations on this, and we are just introducing this here. Here we have also a very detailed monitoring of whatever the user is doing, extra login and extra security, and also have access control on this kind of things. And there you will have different APIs where you can have the private one, the public, or the one for the partners that you define. This will allow you to scale in different ways. Now it's using the serverless approach, and this means that will be called as a function as a service. And right now, this is a line of work for most of the web applications, since it's cheaper and uses less resources. This means that the service have not to be running all the time, and this usually requires a dedicated server for it, but have something that allows you to detect that you are calling it. You start usually a container, Docker container inside Docker infrastructure or Kubernetes infrastructure, and there you will get the result. In this case, the result is that allows you to, using these API facilities, to access other services that are protected behind of this. This is a bit more complex scenario, but allows you to do a lot of extra things and allows you to do several things that are more complex over there. This means that in this case, we have the web application like the one that I mentioned before, and instead of putting in there Vilma, that is the simple one, again, you will have to deploy Kong. Kong, like in the case of Vilma, will be in a different port, will be in a different listening in a different port, and in case it decide that the rate and the conditions are the right ones, you will be interconnected and will send you to one of the instances of your backends. Usually, this kind of deployment is for high performance ones, and mean that you will have a lot of instances in your backend and will do balance of the different algorithms that you can define to interconnect there for different things. So the picture is quite similar to the one that I mentioned using Vilma. Here you have the web application. The web application will get and will be shown to the user. The user will use the authentication flow. This means it will then get the access token. The access token can be in the auth2 format or in the JSON web token format. And later, when it tries to access the web proxy with Kong, will send the request plus the access token. The access token will be checked again. In the most simple cases, can be checked very easily. If you have defined a more complex policy, this will be executed and will be you get the result, and this will return the information plus the information regarding the roles and the things that the user can do. This will be enforced here, and also the Proxy plus conc will allow you to access the different applications that will be running in the backend and in the scenario that we have there. As I tell you, we have interconnected this in a very different or more complex way to have all of this already there. This means that we can connect to the authentication that is running by all the European countries. All the European countries are running different identification services. These identification services can be used both by public services and also by private services. And we have a federation all over Europe. This means that each country is running an ADAS server, and the server first will identify the users for each country. Each country have a different solution for this. The usual here for Spain, at least, is the certificate or sign gateway that allows you to have this kind of authentication. We are soon try to get a new identification card, probably that can be used from the mobile. But well, this is Spain. Each of the countries has different solutions, and also we can not provide solutions for one country, but solutions for different countries. And this means that in the federation, the user that enters the authentication will be redirected to the one in its country. Once it receives the information, sends a trusted information to the other country, and it returns you these kind of things. Keyrod is fully integrated with this, and you can rely on this. You can define how to use all of this. This has been developed as an extension using OAuth 2 plus SAML2. SAML2 is the protocol that has been decided that is being speak here between the different ADAS instance, and then the users can have a very strong identification since they are using their national identification. This can be defined with different profiles that is based on different user ADAS and can be transparent for different application providers. In this case, the architecture is quite similar to the one that I mentioned before. As I said, the interconnection here is done via the SAML flow. SAML is a protocol defined for security, more intended for different type of services, especially for banking and other kind of things. Was taken by OAuth 2 later, and let's say that its use has been limited. It's not used by all the applications over internet, but a lot of specialized applications are still using this. This is the case of ADAS 1. As I mentioned, now there's an ADAS 2 version that is used in self-sovereignty approach, and also the ADs that are the distributed identifiers and all kind of different stuff that added a bit of complexity, but also opens new scenarios and new things. These are still not ready to be used. We are working on in this implementation, but it's not yet fully ready. But in this case, the flow that we have here is quite similar. We can have authentication. The authentication will go to the ADAS node, and there the identification will send some SAML interaction with it, and means that we can have the authentication token. In the same way that we can have the access token, we can ask for information on the user and have the same flow. What is the advantage of this? This means that this is transparent for the application developer. It's just the way that you configure Keylog and do these kind of things is the way that you can handle all these kinds of information and all these kinds of interaction that you have here. Now we are opening a different world, and there is something that is called data usage control. This is quite related to the ideas of data spaces and all these kind of things, especially when the things that you have in the backend, I mean these different backends, will be the ones related to data analysis, probably with machine learning, all these kind of things. If we go to these kinds of scenarios, this means that this backend is not just giving very simple things, but it is doing a complex processing for the data. This complex processing from the data means that you will use data that can be provided by these services or other services. Well, the goal for the data usage control is to ensure the data sovereignty. As we are mixing data that comes, well, could come from the users, can come from another organization. And up to now, what it happens is once that you have the data, you can do whatever you want with the data without nobody knowing these kind of things. Well, we try to solve this problem via accessing controls and things that try to protect what can be allowed to happen in the future. And this have more sense once you interconnect it with the different big data components. I mean, these analysis components and the different processing from the generic enablers. I won't lie to you, this is a very complex problem, and we have find some solution in case that you can have the possibility of adding some components and check the policy. Here you have also problems, not only to protect the users, but also perhaps you want to protect the service providers. The service providers perhaps don't want to give full access to the algorithms that they are using, but you want to assure that they are not doing something that they won't do. For example, it's very common that you allow to use your data if it is anonymized and is mixed with other people's data. This means it is aggregated. Aggregated means that if you have information from a lot of users, all these users don't have a very simple way of getting who you are or what you are doing. When you mix your data with others, well, there is this less chances that you can be de-anonymized and kind of things. But also don't want to fully open the analysis platform. So this means that we will get some agent that will be analyzing this, but you are not sending this information to anyone. So in case you trust the providers and they trust that you can put there some agent, this agent will use as some kind of PDP. It will be analyzing the things that are being done in these platforms. They are not sending the information using protocol verification and validation techniques. We'll try to see if the behavior is inside the right one. You are not doing something you are not allowed, and you will have this kind of things. This is something that will be needed in the future. This added a bit of complexity in the things that we have presented there, since the most simple thing is the access control, and usage control is more complex. As I mentioned, this is an ongoing effort that we are trying to have it fully integrated with all the FIWARE framework, but still is not fully available. But will be, we hope, quite soon to have all these kind of things that really add a lot of things to the things that we have there. As I mentioned, here we have the data provider. The data provider will be sending the information, usually via context broker, real-time information that is there, is being sent to the consumer. Here, we don't only want to use the access and also the authentication and authorization, but we want also to check that this system is already doing what the things that it defined that is going to do this. This policy for enforcement component that is will be interconnected with the with Keyrog. Again, we'll check the policies. You will see if this defining in a W3C standard way, that is the ODRL. It will allow you to do these kind of things. Will interconnect to the processing system and will raise an alarm on cut the access to the information and send an information to whatever is defined that you are allowed to do these kind of things. Of course, this is not covering all the cases, but will cover again most of the cases that you want to add these kind of things. As I mentioned, it add an extra complexity and really adds a lot of things that you have there. As I mentioned, you have all this kind of information over internet. As you see, we have the GitHub identity manager. All the information is already here. Here you have information about how you can install and how you can try to define all these things. As I mentioned, it's built with Node.js technology. This means that you will use npm for trying to define some of the things and manage different things. Probably you don't want to install this in machine and you want to use a Docker container with this. We already provide a public image and all this kind of informations, and we can have different things you have here. You have also a test suite and different changes, as I mentioned here, that you can have on this kind of things. This is the page for Keyrog, and also we have the management. Inside FIWARE, you have all the documentation for the things that we have presented here and the things that we are mentioned and try to define all these things. Looks like my connection is not working very well, but well, I hope that it ended. And here you have all the information regarding how to use and configure these kind of things. Well, looks like the connection is not in this bad moment, but you have the information there and you can check it. Same happened with Vilma. Vilma is also here. You can connect in different ways. You can have the documentations. The documentation, well, here looks like it's working better with these links. So here you have all the information regarding what I have already presented you, but have all kind of programming and details that you want to use. Have a detailed user guide, how you use it. This is with the screens that are captured there, the way you can do these things, or configure the two factor authentication in case you want to use these things. You have how you can install it in your system. As I mentioned, probably you will want to use the Docker. We have already the Docker Hub. We have these environments. And here is the way of configuring everything that I mentioned here. Can be done via web or can be done using other kinds of things. In case you want to interconnect other systems, there are some very easy configuration files where you define the way to interconnect via LDAP authentication, and here you just put the different things, and also the mapping from the LDAP. LDAP defines a record with an extension, and here you just define how you access and interact with this kind of things. In case you need extra tutorial, you know, FIWARE have a very good academy where have step-by-step courses of everything. All the things that I have here, you can later check. I have very detailed lessons that teach you how to use all the things that I have already mentioned in order that you want to go step by step doing all these kinds of things that I am here just giving you the introduction for this. The same happens with the PEP Proxy, that is the one we are offering. Later, you can use this in the most simple scenarios, or later you can add Kong and have all these kind of things. The same, we have the documentation, all the information on the files, and on how you can use Vilma, that is the PEP proxy, can be used and configured in order that you get all the information. In this case, it's just shown the samples using the above two way of getting tokens, but they are, as I mentioned, you can configure and use their JSON web tokens for all these kind of things. The same is that that is related to the more detailed information, where you need and you can have all the different information and different courses that we have already there. And this means all these kind of things. To finish with this kind of parts, we can have here different authentication server. In this case, we have the Auseta Force. The Auseta Force is a very well-defined component that implements the OASIS XML3 standard. If you want to access this, well, the access is not quite simple. As I mentioned, you have a lot of different components, and this means that probably, unless you want to be an expert on this, you did not need to do this. The samples that probably are here is not the most, let's say, human-oriented one. Here you have an example of policies, XML, and there you define a lot of things. There are some tools that can help you to write this, but it's not quite easy. That's why most of the cases are already ways of define or generating this file using Keyrop, because this is, let's say, is not very final user oriented. I mean, if a user needs to edit an XML and know very well what they are doing, well, it's not the perfect word for this kind of this. As I mentioned, it's already there, and same with the other components. You can have a detailed information on how you use it, how you interconnect it, and you can use it. In most of the cases, you don't need to go on with this, but in case you want it, is there. Again, you have also detailed information, detailed courses on how these things are working and how everything goes with different slides that define you how to handle and different ways of handling permission. This is only in the case you want to go to the different scenarios. Kiro will help you with this, and probably you will not need to hear about all these things that I have just mentioned here, and everything will be more simpler. Again, here you have all the information that you need to go with the things that I have introduced here, and this is the things that I want to tell you today about all these kind of things. If you want to have some questions or anything, I will be ready for taking this.
Okay. So if you have any question for Joaquin, you can write them here in the question and answering section.
Or we can show, I know you want to go further in some details. I can go and show you more of this.
Okay, so if there are no questions for this first part of the session, we are going to move to the next one. They are asking if there is any guide or step-by-step in order to implement the security stuff.
Yes, as I know, I will share again. In the training part, I mean, I will share the screen again. Okay. As I mentioned before, for example, in the key rock, let me go. I am not in the presenting mode. I have already in this link, but okay, here you want to go here. You have the documentation that tells you how to go step by step. But I suggest do the academy. The academy is really a very good thing from FIWARE. I will open a new window. And here you have a step-by-step configuration of all the things that you have here. You can go here, and you have all kind of things that are most of the things that I have mentioned here, but goes detail by detail how you create and handle all these things that I have mentioned in this part of this, or how you add a sensor. The My recommendation is that probably you use containers. Probably if you don't want to install all these kind of things, the best is that you use Docker containers and you try to, let's say, handle the best of possible all these kind of things. Same happens with Wilma. As I mentioned, XML Zeta Force will be included, and most of the cases you don't need to even know that it's there, because I mean this is as an extra complexity, especially if you are a beginner. If you're a beginner, I would just go for the let's say more simple scenarios, and then we can use for this. The FIWARE Academy is really good on this, and you have very detailed information. And here you have also step-by-step tutorials of how to handle, how to administrate and create different user organizations, how to manage and create different user roles. That allows you to connect and handle this kind of things. And handling a different way of having use step by step using roles and permissions, how to secure the different access, how to secure the microservices, and how to, if you want to authenticate with this kind of things. Even I have presented you how everything is in the key role. Take into account that this is already defined in order that you don't have to do really a lot of work. I mean, if you have never done this, don't worry. The key of this is that the service that you define does not need to be secure, because you put things in front of it that secures the application. In our case, it's Vilma. Well, the internal joke is that Vilma comes from the Flintstones, and if you know Fred Flintstone knocks on the door and say, Wilma, open the door. Well, this is our internal joke. But this is the role for this. I mean, you don't need to put any kind of security in your application because it comes from the architecture. You just need to put Vilma and IDM, Vilma, or later you see Kong. And this means that you can use a Docker image for Vilma, a Docker image for Keyrock, and just configuring in the way that is shown in the academy. You create the users. In the more user case, you define there the HTTP bears that you define with the roles. This is quite easy, and you don't need to complex your life with the XML thing. And you have something working quite fast without the need of know this. I have tried to show you what is going on inside, and that probably we add a lot of extra functionality, but this means that in a very simple way, you can add it on have it working. I won't say 10 minutes, but half an hour in most of the cases, you can have working what I have shown you and teach you here today. Any more questions? Remember, don't be afraid. It's easy. You don't need to use the more complex thing that I have shown you. Everything is prepared for the usual cases, and follow the documentation that is there, show you the screens and how to configure. It's quite easy, and you can get it working quite soon. Now, okay. In case you have any problem, we can solve it. I mean, especially you can connect me or connect Alvaro or other people from there that can help you with the different problems. Remember, it's easy, it's secure, and you don't have to put anything in your application. Everything is in outside, and in the most simple cases, in half of an hour, you can have it working.
Okay, so thank you, Joaquin. We are going to proceed with the next part of the session. Let me check if I can share my screen. Okay. Well, first of all, I'm going to introduce myself. My name is Francisco de la Vega. I am a co-founder and CTO from one company which is called FICODES. FICODES is basically a member of the FIWARE Foundation, where and we are dealing with two main components within the FIWARE ecosystem, which are, on the one hand, the tool for the creation of dashboards, which is called WireCloud, and on the other hand, we also managing the business API ecosystem software, which, as we are going to see on Friday, it is used in order to develop different kind of marketplaces, data marketplaces, or the marketplace that we have in iFortress. Okay, regarding also the iFortress project, and this is why this session is relevant, we are also in charge of two different components. We are doing things with a software I'm going to present now, which is called API Umbrella. And then we are also adding some extra features to KeyRock component that has been presented by Joaquin in order to support this concept of data spaces that is being presented during these sessions, okay? Well, first of all, which is API Umbrella? API Umbrella is an alternative software that is basically implementing the functionality that has been presented previously regarding the PEP and PDP features, implements both of them. This is a software that was initially developed by the United States National Renewable Energy Laboratory, or NREL, as we are going to call it all around the presentation, and it has been adopted by FIWARE and enhanced within the FIWARE ecosystem with new features and new security protocols. It basically supports securing two different kind of components. On the one hand, it supports the securitization of backend or APIs in the same way as Wilma or Gong is doing. And it is also supporting the possibility of secure front-end services, or basically website. The idea is that it is providing some graphical interface that you can use in order to use API Umbrella as a reverse proxy if you want to serve your backend or your websites using this component. Well, the interesting point with API Umbrella is that it is supporting different authentication and different authorization protocol. Basically, this one that we have in the slides. On the one hand, by default, the implementation by NREL comes only with local users and API keys, which means that you can register a user within the software of API Umbrella, and API Umbrella is going to give you an API key for it. Then to that API key, you can define roles and these kind of things and make requests to the different secure services. But this is not secure enough, in our opinion. So this functionality of local user and API keys is very interesting and is very good for development, for example, or in those scenarios where you don't have users involved, but you have something more like a machine-to-machine or an IoT agent trying to send something to the context broker. These kind of scenarios, the API key stuff could work well, but not when we are talking about final users. So here is when the implementation by FIWARE comes into place, and we have integrated two different things. On the one hand, we have integrated API Umbrella with Keyrock. So you can use users and OAuth tokens issued by Keyrock, both OAuth2 bearer tokens or JSON Web Tokens, both of them are supported into Keyrock, and then it supports the different roles defined in Keyrock applications. So you can create your roles, assign your role to your users, and then use that roles in order to access to the different services secured by API Umbrella. In addition to this, we have also integrated API Umbrella with the authorization registry policies that has been defined in the context of FIWARE Trust project in order to support this data space concept. Okay. In addition to Keyrock, as part of the FIWARE project, API Umbrella has been integrated also with Keycloak, IDM. We are supporting basically the JSON Web Token issued for Keycloak, and we are supporting the two types of roles that can be done, that a user can have in Keycloak, which are those roles that are defined for a specific client or those roles that has been defined for the whole realm. Okay. Well, when we start talking about the different objects that can be managed within API Umbrella, the most important one is which is called an API backend. The API backend are basically APIs or API services that are going to be protected by API Umbrella. When we are talking about API services, we are talking about HTTP services in the same way that it is done with Wilma or it is done with other proxies. The idea here is that when you register an API backend, you have to register which is going to be the redirection between the front end and the backend. So you have to specify which front end host name is going to be used to access to the service and which path is going to be used to access to the service, and how this front end host and the front end path has to be rewriting to a real server with a backend host and the specific path. So this way you can configure this redirection. Once you have the redirection configured, then you have to apply some settings that can be applied to the whole backend service. For example, the authentication and the authorization, whether we are going to use, whether it is needed to use access tokens or not, whether we are going to use only API keys or we are going to be integrated with Keyrock or we are going to be integrated with Keycloak, and which application from Keyrock I'm going to use in order to read the roles, etc. All that kind of information. In addition to this, it is possible to configure some headers and query stream parameters and these kind of things to be injected in the backend request, which could be quite useful, for example, in those scenarios where you have an API server which is having some kind of basic authentication or something like that, that at the end of the day is going to be a fixed header. Well, you can add that basic authentication here and replace that with the most powerful authentication with access tokens and these kind of things. And finally, one other thing that you can configure in the settings is the rate limit. You can specify the maximum number of requests that can be done to the different services, etc. Okay. This is from the point of view of the different settings that can be applied to a whole backend service, but it is not only the case. As I have mentioned, API Umbrella is working not only as a PEP, but also as a PDP. This is because it allows you to define more fine-grained policies using one concept that is called use sub-URL settings. Basically, when you register a sub-URL setting, you specify the matching. So you specify which HTTP method you are going to match, which is the regular expression of the URL you are going to match, and something quite interesting, which is what headers must be present in the request, which is quite useful when you are working with FIWARE context broker, because as you may know, the different tenants of the FIWARE context broker are managed using these headers. So you are able to specify things like when you make a GET request to the entity query endpoint of this specific context broker tenant, you need to have this other specific role. These are the kind of policies that can be created using this sub-URL setting functionality. Okay, the other kind of object or the other kind of entity you can manage with API Umbrella is which it is called the website backend, which is basically a graphical interface on top of a built-in engines server. So you can specify the front-end host, the front-end protocol, and the backend host and the backend protocol, and how this should be rewriting, how the redirection should be done. The idea is that you can use API Umbrella as an engine server, so as a reverse proxy server. In addition to these features of just securing the thing, API Umbrella is providing some analytics support. Basically, API Umbrella is logging all the requests that are made to the different services. It's logging information such as who is the user, which HTTP method was used, which is the URL, which was the response code, etc. And then it is providing 3 different tools that can be used in order to extract some basic analytics from all this information that is logged. We have, on the one hand, the API drill down, which basically allows you to see the different requests that has been made per service and per path. So you can go down in the different services and the different paths in order to see the total number of requests and the information about the request. Then you can also get all the requests that has been made by user, filtering by user, and see all the requests that has been made to all the different services by a particular user. And a final one, which quite interesting, which is the possibility of reading the analytics by location. So you can see which is the origin country of the different requests that has been making into your service, just in case you want to see if a lot of requests has been made from a specific country, or you can see if your request comes from Europe, from the US, etc. This kind of stuff. Okay, so the idea now is that I'm going to show you how all this API Umbrella and how all this thing looks like. Okay, so this is basically how API Umbrella looks like when you access into it. You have 3 different main sections, which is this analytics, these users that is used for the API keys, and the configuration. So if we want to secure something, the first step that we need to do is going here to the API backend section, and here we'll see the list of all the API backends that we have registered. So I'm going to add a new API. Oops. Okay, now I'm accessing here, and now I can configure all the stuff. So what I'm going to do is to register an Orion context broker. You can see that all the things I'm using, and you can see it by the crash, all the stuff I am using is deployed locally. So I have basically just take the Docker files and the Docker Compose stuff that we have here, and I have just Docker Compose up everything and deploy everything here locally. So I'm going to register an Orion context broker. Once you provide the name, the next step that you have to provide is which is the backend protocol of your server. In my case, it's HTTP, because I'm not running it with HTTPS. So now you have to specify where is your service running. In my case, this is running in Orion.docker, and it's running in the port 1026, basically the default one. Okay. So now I have my content broker here, and now we have to provide the rewriting, which is the host and the different paths. On the one hand, we have the host. In my case, I'm going to use directly the host name from API Umbrella, but you have to take into account that this is not mandatory. In those scenarios where you have multiple host names, pointing all of them to API Umbrella, because I don't know, you may have deployed the whole FIWARE infrastructure secure with a single API Umbrella instance. In that scenario, you are going to have multiple host names. well, you can have something like context.whatever.com redirected to the backend or sth.whatever and these kind of things. Okay, in my case, I'm going to leave it just like here. And then you have to provide how the path is going to be rewritten. When you are using multiple front-end hosts and these kind of things, typically you are going to redirect this one by this one because you are going to know which is the API you are accessing only matching the domain name. But in other scenarios where you only have, for example, one single domain name, if you want to deploy multiple FIWARE components in that specific domain name, one thing that you can use is using this prefix rewriting. For example, I could do things like this. I can specify that when we are accessing umbrella.docker /Orion/, we are going to redirect just to the Orion.docker/. This way, you may have multiple services secure with API umbrella when you are only having one single domain name. In my case, as I'm only registering the context broker, I'm going to do the default redirection. Okay, and that's it. This is basically the information that you have to provide in order to configure the redirection. Now we have a couple of settings that we can have a look at. Okay, here you can see that there are a lot of things that can be configured. We can add some query string parameters that are going to be injected in case it is needed by the backend service. You can also add some headers to the request to the backend service if it is needed for something. If your backend service support basic HTTP authentication, you can add it here, and this is going to be automatically encoded in base64, so you don't need to do it manually here. Here we have the stuff we are going to see later, which is the integration with Keyrock. And well, we have a lot of things that we can configure. We can configure the security, we can configure which roles are needed in order to access to the service. You can configure the default rate limit, etc. So just to you to see how this is working, what I'm going to do is to disable the security for now. And I'm going to save my context broker instance. You can see that it is asking me to publish the changes, take into account that if you don't publish the changes are not live in the proxy, meaning that it is not going to work. So you have to publish your changes every time you change something. Okay, so I have published my changes and I have my API backends. So now if we try, for example, to read entities from our context broker, you can see that I am accessing this endpoint, which is the one I have configured as a front-end host. And if I make this request, you will see that I get the data. Okay, so this is a very simple redirection. Basically, I have configured my stuff. Okay, but what is the interesting point with this? The interesting point with this is to start securing this API. So as I mentioned before, the most simple authentication mechanism that we can use with API Umbrella is the API key stuff. If you want to see the API key stuff, we have to go to the user section. You can see that we have two default users that comes with the system. I have another user, which is registration source is API. This is because I have already made some requests with this user, so it is automatically registered. And the idea is that I'm going to pick, for example, this user. I have a lot of information, and here I have the API key. So I can take this API key, and if I access to my API backends, and I come to the global request setting, and I enable the security, okay. You will see that if I try to make the request without any kind of authentication, now I get an error, which is API key or token missing. This is quite simple. When you are using API keys, you need to provide the header X API key and the API key of the user. And if you make the request, you get the data. This is basic authentication. If you want to do something a little bit better, you will probably want to specify that users may have some kind of role in order to access here. So we can say that user needs to have, for example, something called site owner, as we are retrieving data from lamppost. So we can specify that this role is needed. And if I publish the changes, you will see that now the user is not able to retrieve the data because it is not authorized. So if we go to the static user and we add him the role that we have just created. Okay, you will see that now this user is authorized to make this request. Okay, this is the most simple authorization mechanism that you can do with API Umbrella. As I said during my initial presentation, this could be okay when you are developing something, or if you are going to make requests from some software that is you don't want to follow the auth process every time you want to access to the data and these kind of things. But if you are going to work with data, or you are going to access the data from some FIWARE portal, which is going to authenticate with keyrock and these kind of things, this is not enough. So which is the next step? The next step is setting up our keyrock instance and start using keyrock in order to authenticate the users. I have a keyrock instance already with Docker. I have just run it, so there is no even users here. So I'm going to use with the default user that comes with keyrock, just for your knowledge, admin.attest.com with password 1234 is the default credentials that come already with the keyrock Docker image. Probably if you start keyrock in a production environment, you will want to drop this one as soon as you create a real administrator. But okay, I'm going to log with this administrator and user, and this is how keyrock looks like when you are an admin. Okay, so well, you have the possibility to see all this stuff from the user, and then you have the administration section when you can send a notification to all the users of the system via email, where you can add other administrators to the list of administrators, and where you can basically handle the users. So what I'm going to do right now is to create a user, which is called, for example, owner FICODES, and I'm going to give a very simple password. I will enable the user, and that's it. So I can create my user, and now my user is enabled. Take into account that I am using the administration panel, but keyrock allows you to sign up. I mean, from the login window, you have the option to sign up, and keyrock is going to send you the email for validating your email account, etc. If you have all that stuff properly configured. Okay, so I'm going to sign out with this user, and I'm going to log out with the proper one. Okay, and this is how you see when you are not an admin. You only have the possibility to create application, organizations, etc. So if you want to secure something, as we are going to do right now with our context locker, the stuff that we need to do is to register an application. So if you want to register an application, you can do it from here. I'm going to call it, for example, Orion. And now we have to provide the URL that we are going to use, which is okay. And here in the callback URL is where you are going to place your callback URL when you are going to use the authorization grant or the default grants from OAuth. In our case, I'm not going to do this, so I will just let this callback URL, but take into account that if you are registering something with a portal, something that is going to use the authorization code, this URL should be pointing to the real endpoint when you are listening for the OAuth protocol, okay? Then keyrock also has this option of sign out callback URL, which is quite interesting, that allows you to provide an endpoint of your system where keyrock is going to notify when the user logs out. Which is very interesting if you are going to implement something like a single sign-on with a single sign-out enabled. If you have multiple portals, all of them are going to use Keyrock, you probably want to know that the user has logged out in order to clean the session in all the different portals. And here is where we specify which of the grant types we are going to use. In my scenario, I'm only going to use the client credentials one because it's the simplest one for a very simple demo. But well, here you have all of them. You can choose whether they are going to be authorized or not, or you can choose whether you want your application to use OpenID Connect, etc. And well, the application is going to be registered for the owner provider. Well, in this second step, you can add a logo image if you want. It's not mandatory. And then the last step is the one that allows you to register the roles and to manage the different permissions. The permission section is this role section is the one that is going to allow us to create a couple of roles. So I'm going to create 2 of them. I think that we have one which was called Light Owner. And I'm going to create another one which is going to be called Light Reader. And well, you can create any number of roles that you want. In addition to this, you can create, if you want to use, I'm not going to use this because I'm using the API umbrella thing, but for those scenarios where you plan to use the authorization that already comes with Keyrock, this is very simple. You have to only to specify the HTTP action, which is the resource, attach this permission to a specific role, and just giving the user the role, you can use the authorization endpoint from Keyrock. Okay, so I'm going to save my application, and I'm going to do something. I'm going to authorize my user owner with this role I have just created called Light Reader. Okay, so I can save this. Okay. So now we are able to sign in or to get access token from Keyrock. I'm going to use the password grant where I need to provide the proper credentials, which are basically the client ID and the client secret. Okay. And now if I send these equals, I should be able to get an access token. And with this access token, you should be able to retrieve user information. Okay, you can see the user profile. We have all this information about the user, the email, the name, and here we have something which is roles. Roles, of course, in the scope of the application that we are using for accessing in the authorization, the one that we have used to get the access token. And we have here the Light Reader role. So if we want to start using this application, we have registered in Keyrock as and we want to use Keyrock as the IDM and the roles from this application to be the roles to be checked in API umbrella. What we need to do is come here. Oops, it is not this one. This one. We need to come here and go back to the global request settings section. And here we have something which is called external authorization. What I'm going to do is to select that I'm going to allow external authorization. Then we need to choose what kind of identity provider mode we are going to use. The default one is authentication, but there is also an authorization mode. This is very related with these permissions and this PDP stuff that is already coming with Keyrock. If we choose the authentication mode, we are only going to validate. The token, get the roles from the token, and we are going to validate user permissions internally in API umbrella. If you choose the mode authorization, we are going to take the token as it comes, and we are going to send that token to the authorization endpoint from Keyrock, and we are going to get a yes or no for accessing the resource. Basically, is whether you prefer to use Keyrock or you prefer to use directly the API umbrella for the PDP stuff. And well, and finally, we need to specify which is the application whose roles we are going to check. In this case, is the one that we have registered, so it's this one. Okay, so we have this, and I can save, and I can publish my changes. Okay, so we have this. Okay. So now, if I get an access token from the user, I can try to make this request that I have made before, instead of using the API token, using this authorization endpoint. So if I send this request, oops, I take the token properly or not? Joder, puto efecto demo. Light owner. Oh, sorry. I select the right light owner instead of the light reader. Okay. Well, that proves that this is working. I have made the request with a wrong permission, and I have not been authorized to make the request. The user didn't have the role we have provided, so it didn't work. So now we have the proper role, and we make the request again. You will see that now I am authorized to read this data, okay? Because API Umbrella is reading the roles from Keyrock, and since we have specified that this role is needed in order to access to the whole service, it is checking it and it is letting us access to the service, okay? But this might be a little bit limited, because basically what we have done until this stage is only specifying one single role for accessing a whole instance of the context blocker, which is not typically what you want in your scenario. If we want to make something a little bit better and we want to create richer policies, then we have to work with this stuff, with the sub-URL request setting. Basically, is in a sub-URL request setting, we specify a new set of settings that is going to be applied only to a part of the secure service using this matching. So, for example, we can say that when we are making GET requests to any part of the context blocker, the tenant or Lightning, instead of being a light owner, we need to be light reader. And now we can override the required roles from the global request setting. So the user needs to have this one instead of the other one in order to access here. So we can save this. We can save this, and we have to publish the changes. Okay. So if I made the requests I have been previously making with this user, you will see the error that we had before. This API key or API token is unauthorized. So in order to make this request, we need to authorize the user and give the user this other role, which is the light reader. Okay. Okay, and we are now able to retrieve the data. So this is basically the things that you can do with the API Umbrella stuff. You can register your redirection to your APIs or to your websites. You can secure it in a simple way, or you can specify whatever kind of policies you want to specify. Most of them are matching the HTTP method. They are matching the URL. The URL is matched with a regular expression, so you can play a little bit with it. And well, you can specify different roles to do different actions in API Umbrella. The final thing of API Umbrella I want you to show is a real instance that is working. This is running in our environment, where you can see basically that we have multiple API backends registered here. Each of them has their own hostname. So we are, in this case, making the matching by hostname. All of them are pointing to the API Umbrella endpoint. And API Umbrella is managing the SSL certificates, all the CAs, and all the stuff that deals with having a proper secure connection. And well, it is making the redirection. This is from the point of view of the API backends. The website backends are quite similar. If you want to see a website backend, you will see that is no more than this. You specify which is the front-end host you are expecting, which is the backend protocol, and which are the backend service where the real website is running, and which is the backend port where the real service is running. So every time you make a request to this, your website is going to be redirected to this, acting as a reverse proxy. Okay, and finally, as I said previously, the API umbrella staff is supporting some analytics tool. So basically, this is the tool. You can see it by the API drill down, which is the one I have open here. And here you can see all the services and all the requests that has been made to the different services with the IAM, etc. And you can, as the name says, drill down into it. So I can go here, I can go here, and I can go here, etc. You can play a little bit with the timing, and well, if you want to filter a little bit more, you can add more parameters to the query. For example, only ones with a specific HTTP method, only ones with some specific content type, with some status code, whatever. There are a lot of filters that you can use in order to filter a little bit more the request, the result of this analytic tool. And you can also download the table in CSV in case you want to use it in other tool or whatever. Okay, in addition to the drill down, we can filter directly by user. So you can see the user, and you can see all the requests to all the services the user has made, including the timing, including the HTTP method, the address, the country. Well, there are a lot of information that is stored here, even the user agent, etc. And finally, you also can filter by location. So you can see where our requests are coming. You can see that most of them are coming from Spain. You can see some of them coming from Russia. You can see some of them coming from the different states of the US. Okay. Well, that would be all from the point of view of the API umbrella thing. So I'm going to go back to my slides and go to the second part of my presentation, which is what have been done within KeyRock and within API umbrella in order to support this data spaces approach where we have multiple organizations and where we have user federation. Okay, this is the scenario we are going to work on. This is the basic architecture where we have multiple participants within the data space. Each participant of the data space has their own FIWARE infrastructure, which means they have their own context blocker, but also their own security components. They have their own IDP, their own KeyRock, their own PEP, or their own API umbrella, for example. And so they have their own portals, etc. So they have their own FIWARE infrastructure. There is also something which in this architecture, which is this trust provider, which is the component that is going to provide us the trusting between the different participants of this data space. Basically, the trust provider knows who are all the participants, which is the digital certificate signed by the trust provider each participant is having, etc. So you are able to check with the trust provider whether a participant is a valid participant of the data space or not. And finally, which is something more related with the i4Trust project, each of these participant deployments has something which is called the authorization registry, which is basically the place where the different access policies following the i4Trust and iShare stuff are stored, which in practice is implemented as a new API of KeyRock instance. Okay. So this is basically what I have already said. Each organization here in the data space are going to have their own infrastructure, their own context broker, their own KeyRock, their own API umbrella, their own authorization registry, etc. And the trust among the different participants is achieved thanks to this trust provider that we have, where each participant has a unique participant ID and has their signed certificate that can be used in order to sign the request made. And one very important fact of this architecture is that each participant is only going to deal with their own users, meaning that the participant 2 doesn't know nothing about the user of the participant 1. Instead of that, each participant is also managing the permissions of a whole of the other participant organizations as a whole, meaning that what you are saying is, okay, I accept or I authorize the participant 1 to assign permission to their users in order to read this specific part of my data. Okay, and how is this done? This is what we are going to see now. Okay, first of all, how we work with when we are talking about the login or logging in the different participant portals. Because as I have said, if a user wants to log in this portal, but this user belongs to the participant 2, means that he doesn't have an account in the IDP of this participant 1. So basically, the flow is going to be quite simple. The user is going to try to log in the portal. This participant 1 is going to redirect the user to their own IDP, and their own IDP is going to check whether the participant 1 is a valid participant in the network so they can read user information. So in detail, how is performed? First of all, the user from the participant 2 is going to access to the portal of the participant 1 and is going to click on login. When he clicks on login, he needs to specify which is the identity provider, basically who is the participant he wants to use in order to sign in. As soon as the user selects the IDP that he wants to use, the participant 1 portal is going to generate a JSON web token with some special structure, which is this one that we have here. And this JSON web token is going to be signed with the participant 1 certificate, with its certificate. And this token is going to include the identity of the participant 1, which is its unique ID in the network, in the subject part of the token, and the identity of the participant whose identity provider we are going to access as audience of the token. In the next step, the portal of the participant 1 sends this JSON web token to the authorized endpoint of the participant 2 identity provider. As part of the, well, in the request parameter of the request. This is basically the request that you are making. The participant 2 identity provider is going to take the JSON web token, is going to validate the JSON web token signature itself using the public key of the participant 1, and then it is going to call the trust provider to check whether the participant 1 is a trusted party and is a party that is a valid participant of the network, basically. If everything is okay, means that the trust that we have validated the access token, sorry, the JSON web token, and we have validated that the participant 1 is a trusted party, means that when we allow the user that is trying to log with our portal. In order to do that, now we are going to follow something quite similar to the OAuth2 protocol. Basically, the participant 2 identity provider is going to answer the request that has been made initially with the URL for user login using the location header. Basically, the endpoint of the login page of the participant 2 identity provider. And now, we have which is the login endpoint. So the participant 1 identity portal is going to redirect the user browser to the URL provided by the participant 2. So the participant 2 is prompted the login page of their identity provider, and he can provide his credentials. He can provide the username and he can provide the password, etc. But everything within the environment and within the infrastructure of their own organization. After that, the participant 2 identity provider is going to return, now it's very OAuth to everything. I mean, it's going to return an authorization code using the redirect URI that has also must has been also be provided as part of this initial request. Okay. So we have now this, we are called to our redirect URI with the authorization code, and now we need to call the token endpoint in order to get the access token from the user. In order to do that, the participant 1 is going to send a request to the token endpoint of the participant 2 identity provider, providing two things: providing the JSON web token that has been generated in step 1 as a client assertion parameter, and providing the authorization code that has been given to us by the participant 2 IDP using the code parameter. After that, everything is complete. We are going to receive from the participant 2 two different tokens. We are going to receive an access token that can be used to access the different services of the participant 2. And we are going to get also an OpenID Connect ID token with the user information. In addition to this, we can use also the access token in order to retrieve the user information from the access user information endpoint of the particular of the participant 2, as we have done in the previous demo, the same endpoint, basically. So with that, what we have is that the user has been able, this participant 2 has been able to log in this portal of the participant 1 using the credentials stored in the IDP of the participant 2. But what if what we're trying to do is to retrieve data from this participant 2 from the context blocker of the participant 1? Because we are going to make a request as the one that we have been seeing before. We are going to make a request with an access token that is going to go through the PEP PDP proxy architecture. Well, this is going to be done in a similar way, but in this case, we are going to use the authorization registry in order to validate a couple of things. First of all, the user from the participant 2 is going to make this data request to the context blocker of the participant 1. And this is something that is going to go through the PAP proxy. Could be API umbrella or whatever. Then, this request that we are sending must include a JSON web token who should have been issued by the participant 2 identity provider and should be signed with the certificate of the participant 2 And this JSON web token issued by the participant 2 is going to incorporate the user identity and is going to incorporate the permissions that has been granted by the participant 2 itself to its own user, which is the one that is making the request. In the next step, the PEP proxy from the participant 1 is going to validate the JSON web token signature. And after that, is going to validate that the participant 2 is a trusted participant of the data space, as we have been doing in previous steps. Well, once we have that, the PEP proxy is going to check whether the user has been authorized by the participant 2, which means whether the user has been authorized by their own organization in order to access to the specified data in my organization using user permissions that has been previously embedded within the JSON web token. And once we know that this user is authorized by their organization in order to access to the data, the next step is check whether the participant 2 organization itself is authorized to give such a permission to their users. And in order to do that, we are going to access to our authorization registry looking whether this participant 2 is authorized to access to this data they are trying to access. If everything is correct, the data is given back to the user. Okay, so this is basically the idea within this architecture. We have our different participants. Each participant has their own FIWARE stuff. Each participant has their own authorization registry stuff and their own identity provider. If we want our users registered here to access here, we are going to grant them the needed permission in our authorization registry to our local users. They are going to make this request. They are going to read the permissions of this user from the token, and then they are going to read the permissions of the participant itself within our authorization registry before accessing to the context broker. Okay, that's all from my side. I think that we still have plenty of time. So if you have any question, please ask any question that you want. Does API Umbrella support XACML? No, it's a different approach. The XCML is supported by Kirrock and is supported by Elzita Force. And the API Umbrella itself internally is using this stuff of sub-URL settings with the matchers, etc. If you want to use API Umbrella and you also want to use XACML, the two things together, what you need to do is not using API Umbrella as PDP, but when you register the API and you select that you want to use an external identity provider, the IDP mode, instead of choosing authentication, you can choose authorization. If you do that, when we make the request to API Umbrella, API Umbrella is going to take that specific token and is going to just validate that the token is valid. And then is going to ask directly Kirrock whether the user is authorized to do the action he is trying to do. In that case, if you have XCML policies registered in Kirrock, you can use API Umbrella and with XCML policies. But in that case, you use the PDP within Kirrock, which is also okay. I mean, this is up to you. Depending on your scenario, one thing might be better, or in other scenarios, another thing might be better.